and I kind of want to start the conversation with like intensity, right? We kind of had a conversation about high intensity training today.
High intensity training is kind of interesting because I think something gets lost between the proponents, the way they use it, from when they explain how they use it to the other people who use it. For me, high intensity or DC training or anything like that, the reason I like it is the clear marker of progress. There's a lot of confusing things. It's hard to tell whether you're getting better in the gym. And so with like DC training, beating the logbook, progressive overload, if I did 315 for 10 on bench last week, if I repeat the exact same parameters, same rest time, same bench, same weight, and now I do 11 reps, I can be confident that I've progressed. Most people are here and the truth is here. And so people say, well, when I move that direction, I get closer to the truth. And so people always want to just take it all the way. And like I joked, like by the end, I felt like Menser, like he'd start writing articles and I was like, I think the joke I made was like, all you need is one set of 20 on squats in May and one set to failure of dips in December. Any more than that and you're overtraining. Because they always just try to take it too far. You take it as far as it needs to go. Just because you went that direction and you were getting better doesn't mean you're always going to get better in that direction. Another example I used was like Dorian Yates. Everyone uses him as the high intensity guy, and he was a low volume high intensity guy. But watch Blood and Guts. He does 7 exercises on back day. He does bent over rows and deadlifts on the same workout. Yes, he only does one all-out set, one set to failure, but that's still 7 movements, and so it's not like a low volume. It's not like he's going in and just doing one set of deadlifts and a set of pull-downs, and that's his back workout.
Well, he's working up to that weight, too.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If it's a 455 Yates row, how did he get that?
He didn't walk in at 455. Yeah. And so the difference then is that someone else counts their warm-up sets, and so they do a set number of reps. They might do, like I'm sure he did 405 on the way working up. Someone else would do 405 for 10 and count that as a set. He might have only done 405 for 4 or 3 or 6 reps to just do however it was until he felt he got warmed up enough. So the volume really isn't that different. The difference is that the high-intensity guys, they're just doing much lower workload on the warm-ups. They're still doing them. It's not quite as intense, and their heaviest set is just a little more intense. The volume guys are just doing a slightly higher intensity or workload on the warm-up sets, and their main set is a little less intense. The overall workload volume isn't really that much different. It's not like the high intensity is low volume and that it's low workload. It's not. It's just the way that the total workload is spread out a little bit different, and it's more focused on those heavy sets, but they still do the warm-ups. Those warm-ups aren't useless. Like you get as strong as Dorian, he probably did 405 as a warm-up on bent over rows. That's still taxing on the body.
I think what's important to think about with regards to intensity too is you have to define it, right? So we're going to talk about intensity in terms of proximity to failure. What type of failure? Are you looking at pure concentric muscle failure? Are you looking at technique failure or some variation of a more mechanical failure as well? And if you're not willing to define that, you can't necessarily say that you're training with a certain intensity, especially because a lot of literature now, everyone wants to talk about, how close you have to get to failure for hypertrophy is a really hot topic. So if you're thinking about some of the guys that just did sets of 2 to 4 and some of their feeder sets compared to the high volume guys, it's a question of which of those sets are actually productive from the standpoint of hypertrophy.
Yeah, and I think Justin mentioned this with a conversation we had with nutrition of trying to just aim in the general area of the target. You don't have to hit a bullseye every single time. And you guys had mentioned that you're just trying to cross a threshold, right? Do we kind of want to go into that just a little bit more?
Yeah, well, this isn't an exact science. Nutrition and lifting, I mean, there's hard science involved, like with nutrition and calories, thermodynamics and law of conservation of energy holds true, but there's a lot more going on than just, it's not like the way it holds true with, filling up your car with gas. That's one. Nutrition is at its core the same thing, but there's more variation. We were talking about like with the diet, people will think my diet's, because I'll use macros, and a lot of times I'll adjust my macros by only 5 grams. Like I don't adjust protein per meal closer than 5 grams in chunks. And then I have multiple foods that list. So if I give someone 50 grams of protein in a meal, they can pick that 50 grams of protein from chicken or 96 4-ground beef or extra lean ground turkey or turkey breast, and I count them all the same. And so some people will say, well, how does this work? Because 96 4 beef has different calories than chicken. How, if I eat that 6 times a day, my numbers are going to be way off. And what the problem is people don't understand how accurate they can really be with things. And so they look at a food label and they see, for every 25 grams of protein, chicken breast has 2 grams of fat. For every 25 grams of protein, 96 4-ground beef has 4 grams of fat. And that's true roughly on the averages. If you ate human meat, ground human meat it'd have to be listed as 85-15 because the average human is 15% body fat. It doesn't mean every human is 15% body fat. And just the same with chicken. Every chicken isn't 2 grams of fat per 25 grams of protein. So a particularly fat chicken might be 4 grams per 25 grams of protein, 4 grams of fat. And a particularly lean, like these 96 4-gram beef, it's not made in a pharmacy. It's not that precise. So they're trying to get about 4% fat in it, but it's not to the milligram. So a particularly lean pound or chunk of 96 4-gram beef might be only 2 grams of fat per 4 grams of 25 grams of protein. So if you're counting it exactly so precise to that, you're thinking you're getting more accuracy, but what you're actually doing is creating inaccuracies. Because you're saying if you eat 6 meals, that's 2 extra grams of fat for the 96.4 per meal. So that's, 12 grams of fat difference. That's well over 100 calories different according to the food label. But the truth is, if you take the bell curve and where those things lie, you're actually getting inaccurate in the wrong direction, because the truth is that the average chicken is 2 grams, the average 96.4 is 4, but there's crossover. And trying to get too precise with it actually creates more variance in the diet that you aren't able to adjust around.
And Dave, you've obviously worked with Justin. Was that a more of a helpful situation to have, or were you the type that needed to kind of lock in on very specific things?
I don't know.
No.
I don't need to lock in. I mean, the whole thing was, when we started working together, one of the first conversations was, I don't want to do this last 6 week shit. Yeah. Right. I mean, I've been around it my whole life. It's like peaking for a powerlifting meet. If you want to stay relatively safe, don't do the last 6 weeks before a show. Don't do the last 6 weeks before a meet. I mean, that's when things are brutal. So we removed that from the get-go. So then for him, it's like, okay, this can be more lax. So yes, I had a food list like what he's talking about. And obviously he wasn't going to be as strict with me, because the end goal's not the same. Now I had to lose 70 pounds or whatever ridiculous amount of weight it was. And the discipline wasn't going to be a problem either. Like you said, if I didn't want chicken, then I had chicken and steak. I'd have both. I'd mix it up, because chicken's gross to me, especially if you're eating like 8 ounces. And he's right, the protein never really changed that much. And the other thing too, and it may have changed since then, is I wasn't supposed to count the fat in the protein. The only fat I was supposed to count was the fat that was from the fats that were on that list. So that makes it all easier, right?
And that's where people that fat is getting counted. It's just that my food list is, the foods you'll be giving in your food list are such that for the portions you have per meal, the fat of each of the protein sources will be roughly the same. And it's like that 96.4. They're not exact, but the natural variation between the meats for the amount that you're going to get in your diet, is going to mean we don't need to count the fat. The fat is there, and it's implicit in the diet. But I know that each meal is about 4 to 6 grams of fat or whatever from your protein sources. So we're not going to count that, because trying to count that when we can't know the exact amount is actually going to make us less accurate.